Hey folks, welcome back to 10-Minute Leadership Talks with Joseph DiPietro. Today we're going to go over Lesson 5, which is going to be on management. Now just a reminder, if you haven't watched videos leading up to this point, they're all numbered 0, with 0 being introduction up till this one. And you might want to watch those before you get to this one because there's going to be some things that we cover in the previous videos that are going to be brought up. So you might not understand what we're talking about. So go ahead and watch those videos and then come on back to management. For management, we're going to have 3 sort of sub-topics today with staff, personnel, and team management. We can go into each one of those subtopics for entire lessons, so these are just going to be some broad stroke tips and tricks with regard to team management or unit management. Once again, I want to remind you that I challenge you to make your own leadership style. These are just some notes, some tips, things that have worked well for me, but make sure you come up with whatever works best for you and whatever unit you're a part of. So, Lesson 5, management. First thing we're going to talk about is staff management. Now, we've talked about this a little bit in the past with regard to ownership. Remember, that's bullet point number 2 of my expectations. But as the leader of a team, of a unit, you're sort of like the head coach of a football team. Everything that is good that happens is due to you, and everything that is bad that happens is due to you. How you handle that, how you disseminate that sort of credit to your subordinates or maybe to your superiors if necessary, that's on you. But just remember, at the end of the day, you're responsible for all the overall success and failures of your organization. So just remember that when you're talking staff management, and then here's some tips and tricks to kind of make that a little bit smoother. So one thing that I've definitely noticed over time is whenever you're in charge of a unit organization, you're going to have that sort of key staff. Now, for me, when I was a platoon commander, or if there's any soldiers watching, if you're a platoon leader, your staff is sort of yourself and your platoon sergeant, maybe your section leaders, depending on what kind of unit you're with. But if you're in charge of a team, you might have coordinators, you might have like section heads or division or department heads, whatever it might be. So that might make up your staff, and the higher you go up, your staff is obviously going to get bigger or more oversight. But just in general, you're always going to have some sort of a staff, and no matter what, you and your staff have to be on the same page when you're getting information out, whether that's to your subordinates, to hire, to lateral units, whatever it is, you always have to be on the same page. In earlier videos, we've talked about transparency and how hard it is to kind of keep things behind wraps nowadays, just with information and technology being so expansive. If you're not on the same page with that staff or with your peers, fellow unit leaders, whatever it might be, it's going to be really hard to cover it up. So make sure you're always on the same page. Feel free to have disagreements behind closed doors, right? I think that's one thing that our society doesn't really allow for, is that they think that if you disagree with somebody, then you should be enemies. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's actually probably a good thing if you have some minor disagreements every now and then, because it's going to give you different perspectives or maybe a different solution to a problem that you've never thought of before. So by all means, have those disagreements, talk through them cordially. There's no need to jump down each other's throats, but have those good conversations, and you might come up with a better product than what you thought, or maybe your idea wasn't the best. I think that's something that we sort of struggle with as leaders, is we kind of think, okay, my idea is going to be the one we're moving forward with, but somebody might have a better idea out there. So be open and definitely take advice from those, especially if you're in a situation like officers in the military are, where you're put into a unit that you are the junior member of as far as time in, right? So more than likely, extenuating circumstances might not be the same, but if you're getting put into a unit and you're surrounded by folks that have been doing that for a while, then maybe there's some advice out there for you. I also will challenge you that if you hear the phrase, that's the way we've always done it, or that's the way it's always been, that might not always be the right choice, and it might not be the best thing for you. So keep that in mind and always challenge those norms, because they might not be the best thing, but also be open to advice and open your mind up a little bit. But after you have those disagreements, again, behind closed doors, the second you step out of that door, out of that meeting, and you present your ideas to your folks, then you have to be on the same page with your staff members. You can't be vocally, disinterested in each other's ideas, or say behind someone's back, hey, this guy came up with this idea and it was garbage and it wasn't my idea, but we're going to go with it. That stuff is horrible for unit cohesion. A lot of times, unit leaders will get told to do something from higher, and then they'll tell folks below them, like, hey, we're going to do this because we were told to do it. That's not really a great answer. It's something I struggle with a lot, because if someone says, hey, we're going to do it this way, and I don't really like it, I probably am a little bit more vocal than I should be sometimes with my displeasure, when in reality I should say, okay, I'm going to take it, and we're going to make the best of it, and we're going to make it work. A lot of times you might not see the big picture of that, so your superior might say, hey, this is what we're doing and this is why, or they might not give you the why, unfortunately. Hopefully that's not the case. But you've got to go and you've got to follow that order, and you've got to accomplish that task that you've been given, whether you like it or not. And make sure that the subordinates, the people that you're working for or helping out, they don't see that displeasure and they don't see that distrust that you have going up, because it's just going to make everything worse, and it's going to exponentially get worse the lower you go down. So make sure you're on the same page and own that problem or own that task. Don't kind of peg it on somebody else, especially pegging it on higher. And then the other thing with staff, so a lot of times it's really good to be successful, but a lot of times you're going to get credit as a leader for the accomplishments of your unit. This is one of those ownership expectation bullets. So bullet point number 2 in ownership that we talked about earlier too is that if you do well, like that's great, and it's on you as the leader that you did that, congratulations, but make sure you disseminate that credit to your people. It goes a long way for them, especially if they're able to see it, if it comes back to them. So an example of that might be if you're in a staff meeting and someone says, hey, good job on that task last week, or good job on that presentation. Instead of saying like, thank you, I worked really hard on it, say, well, my subordinate did really well, or Mr. Johnson worked his tail off to get that presentation built in time. He's the one that deserves the credit. It's always good to make sure your people get recognized like that, and they might hear about it, they might not. It doesn't really matter, but as long as you're giving credit where credit's due. On the opposite end of that, if it's bad stuff, right? So if you're getting reprimanded or punished, or the presentation wasn't good, just take it on the nose. I highly recommend not saying, well, Mr. Johnson was in charge of that, because at the end of the day, like we said, you're in charge of the product or the lack of product that your team or unit puts out there. So don't ever kind of deflect that bad information or that punishment to anyone else. Sort of take that one on, and then if you want to disseminate that punishment in your own way, that's completely up to you. But in front of people, especially your superiors, hey, take it on the face. I got that one. That was my fault. And then you can work with your team to get better after that. So there's just some real quick kind of staff management lessons there. So then personnel management. So this is going to be like your workers, your subordinates, the folks that we talk about. You work for them, making sure that you get them the resources and put them in the right place to succeed. Some tips for personnel management. Own the decisions. So we talked about that a little bit. Anything that comes through you, just own it. Make sure that it's your own, even if it's not your idea. And if you don't really agree with it, if that's what you're told to do and you're going to do it that way, just own it. Make sure that they don't know that you don't like the idea, because if they think that you're not invested in that task or that plan, then your folks aren't going to be working hard for it either. So make sure you always own it, and don't try to say, hey, this wasn't my idea, I don't like what we're doing, but we're going to do it anyway. That's a really bad habit to get into, and that's something I struggle with as well. So try not to do that as much as possible, and that'll help the overall morale and probably lead to more success in that task. And once again, you might not be privy to all the information at hand, so there might be a bigger picture scenario that you're not thinking of, and so don't let the folks think, hey, I don't know why we're doing this, or we're just wasting our time, because there might be something that you aren't thinking of that you're doing that task for. And something else with personnel, and this is a big one for me, specialize but challenge. And what I mean by that is your folks are going to be good at different things, and if you go back to the counseling lesson, you're going to find out what they're good at or maybe what they struggle at, and through counseling and through evaluations, you're going to see, as a team, where we're at individually. Hey, I'm good at this, but they're good at this, and John is good at that, and Mary is good at that. So you have the specialization where everyone kind of has their part, and hopefully people are good at multiple things. If not, then they have their kind of specific role. So it's really important to make sure that people are set up for success and they're in the roles that they're going to be good at. Conversely, you still want to challenge people, make them uncomfortable with other tasks or other topics, other lessons, whatever it might be, so that they can learn, right? So if Mary is good with numbers and all you do is have her crunch numbers all day, and John is good with people and he talks with people all day, but they don't kind of cross paths at all, and John doesn't do numbers and Mary doesn't do people, well, neither one of them are going to grow, and so they're going to kind of be limited for their overall growth, and they might be passed over for promotion because maybe their next step up is to be good at both numbers and people, and since they're only good at one, they're not going to get that promotion. So make sure you challenge people, task them with things that maybe are a little bit tougher or out of their element, but you think that they can still handle. And when we talked about goals kind of in the beginning, we set our goals. Remember, those goals are going to be things that might not be reached, right? Expectations, always reaching. Goals, you might not reach them, but if you're working towards a goal, you're always going to get better at it. So if you challenge them and say, hey, I want you to accomplish this task, or I want you to be able to do X, Y, and Z by this date, then even if they don't get to that point where they're really good at it, they're at least getting better and more familiar with that task. So make sure we're challenging our people and getting them better for another job, a higher job, a different position, because if they promote or if they get a higher position within that organization, they're going to be responsible for more things. And if they don't have familiarity with it, then it's going to be a struggle for them. So specialize but challenge. Make sure they're in a successful position where they're going to be good at something, but then break them out of their comfort zone, especially when you have some free time or maybe downtime in your cycles, whatever kind of organization you're in. Challenge them to learn a different task, different skill, or different part of your organization. So that's some personnel stuff, and then remember, we're always here, we're working for our people, and we're trying to take care of them, and a lot of that is that getting to know them, that counseling, ensuring that we're doing our evaluations, and again, giving them the resources that they need to succeed. That's our job as leaders, to put them in those positions. All right, next up, we're going to talk about team management. So kind of talked about, hey, this is our staff, now here's our personnel. So now big picture, team management, here's some notes. So first is reflection, and this is very similar to the specialized but challenge thing. One of the most important things when you're in charge of a team is making sure you know what you're good at, what you're not good at, and then having a plan to improve at those things that you're not good at while still maintaining the things you're good at. Because you want to improve on those struggle items so that you keep getting better and you grow as a team and you become more proficient as a team. But you can't forget all the things that you're good at, because if you don't train to those and if you don't apply those skills and those traits of your team, then you're going to lose them over time. So you want to maintain that and improve on the more struggling areas for your team. So that's where the reflection is going to come into play. So look yourselves in the mirror as a team and say, hey, we're good at X, Y, and Z. We're not good at A, B, and C. So let's focus a little bit on A, B, and C, and let's continue to mix in X, Y, and Z. That way we can be 9 out of 10 on X, Y, and Z instead of 8 out of 10, but then we're going from a 5 out of 10 on A, B, and C up to a 7 out of 10. So we're slowly improving all the things, but really focusing on those topics or traits that we're really struggling at. And that's going to start with reflection, because if you're not honest with yourself, and this is a personal thing too, if you're not honest with yourself or with your team, then you're not going to recognize those downfalls or those discrepancies, and you're not going to be able to fix them. So having that good team reflection and being open to feedback is always a good thing for that team management. And then a winning mentality. So this is another big one for me. Confidence is huge, right? Now there's a really thin line between confidence and cockiness. I always try to say, be confident but be humble, and it's really hard to do. I definitely cross that line into cockiness a lot of times. But you don't really want to be too humble either, because if you're good at something, then exploit that, right? Like if I'm good at a trait or a task, then do what you can to exploit that professionalism. If you're good at numbers, the Mary John example earlier, if Mary's really good at numbers, then let her succeed at numbers, and she should want to be in those numbers roles. And John's really good at the people, so let John do the people things. Be confident about that, but also be humble to say, hey, I know I'm good at this, but there are definitely ways I can grow myself, and then there's ways I can help the team grow too. So that's that sort of confidence, humility balance, and that's really hard. That's a tough thing to do. But how it reflects on the team is, what I always tell people is, if your team doesn't at least think that they're the best or one of the best in that bigger team or bigger unit, then something's wrong and your mentality is broken. The way that I've always seen this is, if you're in a platoon, so this is more for the military folks, so if you're a platoon commander, if your platoon doesn't think that they're the best, regardless of if they are or not, it doesn't matter. If they don't think that they're the best, then their confidence is in the toilet, right? It doesn't matter if they are or aren't, unless there's just a huge discrepancy between their confidence and their ability. But if they're at least decent and they're competing for a top spot in that unit, if they think they're the best, then they're in a good mentality. Because the last thing you want to do when push comes to shove, when you're really in the fire, if it's in a really dire situation, is to not have that confidence going into it, then you're going to be in trouble. So as long as you think that you're the best and you have some sort of professionalism and proficiency to back it up, then that's a really good winning mentality. All right. At the same time, help those other people out in your organization. If you know something, or if you have a policy or a structure that works really well for your group or your organization, don't be afraid to share that. All right. Obviously, we're all always competing with the folks on the left and right, but if you're a part of a big organization, then you want to see them succeed too. So share share those ideas or share those policies, but remain confident and make sure that you as a team manage that team to remember, hey, we're really good at what we do. If not, we're the best at what we do. So let's go make it happen. Okay, so that's where that winning mentality comes from. The second that you lose that confidence as a team, then things are going to go south from there. And the last 2 points with regarding management, I want to bring up next man up is a common phrase, and this can be next woman up too. Just next man up is what we always hear, especially when you're talking with personnel with specialized but challenge. One of those things we want to challenge is getting them prepared for the next job or a different job within the organization. So the way that I always see next man up is you're not always going to have all your folks available to you. If you do, then great. It's going to be rare. Folks are going to be doing different things. If you're in the business world, you're going to have people on vacation, or you're going to have folks on sick leave, or just a day that they're out of the office and you need them there for something. Well, somebody's got to be able to pick up that slack. So making sure that you're always training folks for different jobs, especially for higher jobs, like the next job in their ladder of progression, that's going to be huge. So making sure you're doing that and preparing your unit for those missing folks, including yourself. So, if you're immediate subordinate, so if you're platoon sergeant, if you're a platoon commander, if you're executive officer, if you're a company commander, if you're assistant team leader, if you're the team leader, if they're not prepared to do your job, then you're failing as a leader because you haven't prepared them to take that role over, okay? So making sure we prepare that next man up concept. This is especially important in sports too. So you think of a football team, right? If you have one quarterback on your roster and that quarterback goes down, like what are you going to do? So making sure you have that next quarterback ready to go so that the team doesn't fall apart because of that one person. What I always say with regard to next man up is if you have someone who is that we can't afford to lose them person, then they either need to get promoted because they're that valuable, or you need to be fired as leader because you haven't trained anybody else to do that. We see this a lot of times when we want to get folks out to different training and we say, hey, I want to get them to a school so they can learn a different skill, but I also have this exercise coming up, or I have this project coming up and I don't want to lose them for that project or exercise. Well, if they're that important to the project or exercise, then they probably should be getting paid more or have more responsibility than what they have right now. So just remember, if that's the case, then you haven't done your job as a leader to prepare that team for what could happen in the future. And then point of friction. So in the Marine Corps, we treat MCDP-1, which is the Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, warfighting, as like a holy grail, and it's an awesome document and publication. Even if you're not a Marine, if you're not in the military at all, I would highly recommend reading it because it has a lot of good tips and tricks with regard to leadership and exploiting weaknesses, and that's something you can do in the business world. So highly recommend MCDP-1 if you haven't read it before. But one of the things I really love about it is how it kind of encourages leaders to put themselves in the point of friction. Where you think your team is going to struggle the most, or where you're going to find the most adversity, that's where you need to put yourself. So you don't want to be one of those leaders that kind of steps back and lets everybody else figure it out the entire time. By all means, empower your people and push as much down to low levels as possible. But if you know that your team's going to struggle at a certain location, whether it's in a project or in an exercise, that'd be a really good place to kind of insert yourself so that you have that extra supervision. And if you are the most experienced of your team, or if you have the most knowledge of your team, you can help them out along the way so that they're prepared for anything, and they have you as that backstop to sort of guide them in a troubling time or something that's giving them a hard time. So put yourself at the point of friction. I'm a huge fan of that, and that's definitely something in any line of work, in any realm of business, military, sports, whatever it is, wherever you need that extra help, that's where you can put yourself. Or if you have that staff, you can inject one of your staff members into that position so that you can give them that extra supervision or extra guidance. So that's something I'm really big on, is putting yourself at that point of friction. That'll go a long way, and then your individuals are going to see that, like, hey, we were really struggling here, and our leader jumped in and helped us out a lot, and that's going to go a long way for you at building that team and for that kind of credibility for yourself too. So management's a big deal with regard to how we take care of our people and where we give them the resources to succeed and how we let them succeed, and how we let them fail so they can kind of learn from their mistakes or learn from their discrepancies. So that's a big part of management, and basically putting your folks in the position to win and be successful. All right, this is going to be the last of our scheduled lessons, or my scheduled lessons, with regard to the 10-minute leadership talks. So after this, I might come up with some different ones in the future, but if any of you are out there, or if I have some former students that remembers lessons that we talked about in classes, feel free to send them my way, and we'll go over some different lessons. But other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed this and learned something, and always remember, we're working for our people, and we owe them that maximum effort at all times. And if you do that, then you're pretty successful in my mind. So I appreciate your time, and have a great day.